We turn our attention now to some of the latest news coming out of SARS, because the Revenue Agency is clamping down on mistakes when people file their tax returns. From the 1st of April, SARS has started limiting the bona fide inadvertent error defense to a much narrower set of circumstances. Let's speak now to Jashwin Baijoo, who is the Head of Strategic Engagement and Compliance at Tax Consulting South Africa. Jashwin, thanks so much for talking to us. Just before we get into the specific amendment by SARS, it seems now almost daily we are receiving warnings from SARS. Is this a deliberate attempt to try and get people to comply?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. So I think as a first point, SARS are sending out warnings across numerous platforms. One of which is WhatsApp. You get SMSs, you get emails, you get notification reminders on your e-filing. So absolutely.
So they've started WhatsApping taxpayers. I haven't received any yet. Wow. Okay.
Well, we'd assume you're compliant then.
I hope so. Okay. So they really are tracking people down on multiple platforms.
Absolutely. And this kind of just reinforces that SARS is trying to increase voluntary compliance. They've had great success with their targeted compliance programs. The last SARS targeted compliance program showed a 12.4 billion increase in collections for the last fiscal year as compared to the prior fiscal year.
Because every time I see it across multiple media platforms, SARS warns wealthy taxpayers, SARS warns people immigrating. And it seems that SARS is really trying to use the stick method to warn people at the moment. That's just the kind of thing, the kind of sentiment that I'm observing here.
So that's a very interesting one because, we've seen historically with SARS, it's always a give and take. So you'll recall in the budget speech, there were quite a few pro-taxpayer announcements. And it did, as you said, taxpayers financially immigrating. While the budget speech announcements, the increase of fiscal discretionary allowance, no bracket creep, etc., really did come across as though SARS was trying to claw back taxpayers considering financial immigration.
And there was, of course, the increase on the capital gains tax on the sale of a primary residence. And there was also some concessions there for middle-class consumers. Let's get into then the specific amendment. So what is how do people claim a bona fide inadvertent error on their tax returns?
So first, just to understand this, we first have to understand the understatement penalty table. All right. Now, line 1 of the table as well, if there's a substantial understatement, your penalty ranges between 0% if you voluntarily disclose, up to 20% if it's a repeat case or it's obstructive. Now, historically, your bona fide inadvertent error has been more for those lower percentage-based penalties. Because obviously, with intentional tax evasion, repeat case 200%, you can't claim that you simply committed or omitted certain item on your tax return. Now, understanding your bona fide inadvertent error, well, historically, for any tax understatements involving behavior subject to a penalty in terms of the Tax Administration Act, the taxpayer is required to pay said understatement penalty in addition to the tax. And what SARS have now done is saying, well, we've removed the exception of bona fide inadvertent error as standalone relief. Because historically in the law, as much as practically it applied just to these percentage-based penalties, the law read very broadly. And where it is now in terms of specification is, while the amendment is emphasizing full disclosure and professional tax advice being critical in penalty remission, and the substitution is now, while SARS must grant a remission of penalties imposed for substantial understatement. As I said, that goes up to 20% only. If either the understatement arose from a bona fide inadvertent error, or the taxpayer made full disclosure of any arrangement causing prejudice to SARS or the fiscus, and did so very voluntarily. And that then speaks to, while they still want to give that relief where it genuinely is from a lack of tax education, because we know that is a systemic issue in the country, but where it is intentional, we can see gross negligence, SARS will not go easy on taxpayers.
So it's essentially now becoming harder to avoid penalties and claiming that an understatement was a mistake.
Correct. So remember, with your understatements, if there's an understatement on a return and SARS do not pick it up, that is when you file a voluntary disclosure application to SARS to correct the understatement. And in terms of the new dispensation, so historically, you file a VDP and you are protected from penalties and criminal charges. In terms of the new amendment, again, give and take, SARS have now permitted that you may file a separate application for the remission of interest there. On the other hand, where SARS imposes the understatement penalties either due to an audit or to taxpayers not filing and SARS having to raise estimate assessments, that is when we see it hitting 100, 150, 200% of the actual tax due.
That's the penalty owed.
That's the penalty, correct.
Wow.
So if your tax is $1 million and it is intentional and it's a repeat offense, you can get hit with 200% penalty. Suddenly you got a 3 million rand bill. And let's not forget the interest that's backdated to the date on which the original tax payment was due.
That's quite incredible. But now SARS is allowing people to apply for a pause in payment while they dispute the underassessment.
Yes, so your suspension of payment. Now, your suspension of payment has historically been in the law, and the only amendment, so historically it was you may suspend your obligation or your SARS's collections where you have filed a dispute in terms of a notice of objection or you intend to file a dispute. SARS have now, again, give and take, extended that to say that, well, now where an estimate assessment is issued by SARS and the taxpayer intends or has requested a reduced assessment, they may also apply for a suspension of payment.
Okay. So you, as you mentioned, there are really some give and take. So how do you expect this now to play out? I mean, this affects people who are mostly provisional taxpayers who have multiple sources of income.
So not necessarily. This impacts all taxpayers because remember, if we shift quickly over to what your criminal provisions are in terms of the tax legislation, well, not filing a tax return is a criminal provision.
Right.
Not correctly or fully declaring your income or any misstatement of a substantial nature may be viewed as criminally liable.
Right.
So what happened now is by granting on the suspension side, that's the give, saying, listen, you can suspend in this additional circumstance. And your take is, well, for your understatement penalties, you now have to provide a complete defense. Bona fide inadvertent error is no longer a standalone defense. And the reason we see this is SARS have been ramping up the efforts put into collections. Project Billions last year, they brought in between 1,500 and 1,700 additional staff to work on collections. And that is from kind of a call center guy that's going to give you a light nudge to actual specialists that really dig deep into high value matters. On the high net worth individual side, remember, SARS have been using a segmented model, similar to how there's a social influencer and gig economy segment. There's a high net worth individual segment where the very wealthy have their own dedicated relationship managers that assist them in being compliant. So this is a very wide net has been cast in terms of the current amended dispensations.
It's much harder, of course, to underestimate or undercount income if a person earns PAYE and they're submitting an IRP5. It's basically now almost an automatic process throughout.
That's correct. And also remember, for your provisional guys, it's not like you have one provisional filing. There's a minimum of 2, which means even if you are but under in the first one, you can bring it up to speed and do your and there's a third payment if you really under and you do a top-up payment. And in those instances, SARS are very happy to consider remissions.
Let's look then at the upcoming tax filing season for non-provisional taxpayers. Expected to start in July?
Correct. Usually it's around July.
Okay. And what are your expectations around that? We've seen the record numbers that SARS has collected provisionally for the 26-year financial year.
Well, look, I mean, 2 trillion is no small feat. And with the upcoming filing season, well, the one thing we anticipate is heavier scrutiny on taxpayer submissions, including IRP5s, including just your general interest income you would receive from like a money maximizer or a savings account. And the one thing we must note as well, SARS already have access to all of that data. And with the SARS Modernization 3.0, they are relying and will be relying more heavily going forward on AI and certain algorithms to process this enormous amount of data for all South Africans.
And so will we see an increase, do you believe, in automated assessments?
So my view is we will see an increase in automated assessments, because you remember when it was first introduced many years ago, it was for, you earning 500,000 or less, and it's purely salaried income, meaning it's all on IRP5. And we've seen that increase year on year, simply because SARS has access to more data, and these data-driven insights are allowing them to now auto-assess taxpayers that may have multiple income streams or higher income brackets. What we've also seen is, while there's many automated processes, including where you owe an amount and the payment due date per the auto assessment or original assessment, however it's issued, whether you file or whether they send it to you, passes. SARS may then send automated messages out in the form of a light nudge. And that was something Commissioner Kieswetter actually introduced, kind of the light nudge, because his view is taxpayers don't want to be non-compliant, and sometimes they genuinely just forget.
Okay, well, it will be interesting, of course, to see how Johnson Makubu does. He's already been the acting commissioner for a few weeks now. I think there was a transition, and there's also the transition period. He comes into office at the end of this month.
Yeah, remember, Johnson Makubu has been with SARS for many years, and he was actually integral, together with Commissioner Kieswetter, in the current voluntary compliance programs, going back to 2020 when these things started, and 2024 when the compliance programs were initiated. So having a steady hand at the helm and someone that has that deep institutional knowledge will have a degree of continuity for taxpayers. So we do not foresee any significant left turns or right turns, but rather steady continuity, and if anything, more pressure being applied on non-compliant taxpayers as well as businesses, because SARS have now significantly increased the pursuance of personal liability against directors, shareholders, or individuals who are financially responsible for decisions of the business where the business is non-compliant and has a tax debt liability.
Thanks so much for talking to us tonight, Jashwin Baijoo. He joins us from Tax Consulting South Africa. He's the head of strategic engagement and compliance.